I'm Matt Bishar with Nareit here in Hollywood, Florida for Nareit's REITwise, the 2018 Law, Accounting, and Finance Conference. Joining me today is Bartjan Zoetmulder, tax partner with Loyens Loeff. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
How is base erosion and profit shifting impacting U.S. REITs investing in Europe?
Oh, I think generally what you will see is there will be less interest deduction possibility against the tax base in Europe. There will be more withholding taxes on payments going back to the US, and there will also be local CFC rules. So overall, I think there will be a higher tax bill to be paid by US REITs investing abroad.
And will the recent U.S. tax reform impact the way U.S. REITs structure their investments abroad?
Yeah, that will depend a little bit on how the foreign subsidiaries are qualified, whether they are look-through entities or opaque. If they're look-through entities, maybe the negative impact is a little bit less, but if they are opaque, and for example, if you have per se corporations that you invest in or taxable REIT subsidiaries, or if you invest in joint ventures, then you cannot always control whether it's opaque or joint or transparent. So that may indeed have an influence from a US tax reform perspective as well.
And lastly, what pitfalls, if any, should U.S. REIT tax directors have in mind as these two new tax structures, BEPS and the U.S. tax reform, come together across the globe?
Yeah, so US REITs, when they invest in Europe, they typically invest via a hub. So they choose a country from which they enter the European market. And what's happening with the BEPS project is it will become much more difficult to just have a company from where you enter the market. So what you need is, first of all, in respect of the general anti-avoidance rule that is introduced in the European Anti-Tax Avoidance Directive, you will need real economic substance in the company that enters Europe. So the idea is that you make use of European single markets, but that also means that you really have to send people over to the European market to make use of it. So that is one thing. So there will be anti-abuse rules in respect of withholding taxes. That also applies internationally, so not just to Europe, but multinationally. So there will be a multilateral instrument that will apply to all tax treaties, introducing a principal purposes test, basically putting the intermediate entity that is used as a hub at the test, whether or not that has sufficient economic substance. So that's extremely important. It will mean that US REITs will need to send over more people to Europe to really make it work, to make use of the European market from a tax perspective. Then secondly, interest deduction. So there will be two new rules that are going to lead to less interest deduction. And one of them is extremely important, which is the earnings stripping rule. That also applies to third-party debt, so bank loans. So typically bank loans were excluded from any interest deduction denial rules. But in Europe now, mandatorily, all member states have to include in their legislation a rule that says that if you leverage your investments and you deduct interest for more than 30% of your EBITDA, you will not get a deduction irrespective of whether this is third-party debt or intragroup loans. And that's going to give a significant impact, I think, on the real estate market. Because typically, of course, real estate is rather highly leveraged, at least if you're in a taxable environment, then that happens a lot. And I think thirdly, what you will see coming from this, that potentially there will be more interest in European REITs again. So the European REIT regimes may become a little bit more attractive because of the interest deduction denial rules. So that is something. And then fourthly, I think you see it in the newspapers, there is a trade war going on between Europe and the US, but there's also a tax war going on, I think, between Europe and the US. What happens with the European Anti-Tax Avoidance Directive is that Europe is trying to get a bigger share of the taxing rights that the US thinks belongs to the US. So there is a fight going on, and I think maybe the tax reform in the US is also, to some extent, a result of all the international tax changes, reduction of the corporate tax base, try to introduce more significant CFC rules, GILTI rules, bringing the profits back to the US, bringing the people back to the US. That's the whole goal. That's what you see also in tax legislation. But Europe is trying to do the same, trying to attract the people and the tax base to Europe. So somewhere in the middle, this is going to lead to a new reality. But it's going to be an interesting period, I think.
Thank you so much for your insights.
Okay.
For more from REITwise, be sure to visit Nareit's website, REIT.com.